Good evening and thank you for keeping it KTN. I'm Jesse Rogers. Today is the second Thursday of June, traditionally the most critical financial day on the East African calendar. In a synchronized fiscal showcase, finance ministers in Nairobi, Kampala and Dodoma have simultaneously laid their cards on the table. Locally, Treasury CS John Mbadi has charted what he calls a path to Canaan through Singapore via the 4.8 trillion shilling spending plan. But how do we pay for it? Can the government aggressively mobilize domestic revenue without suffocating the very private sector expected to play a part in driving growth? Today's focus is all about the budget highlights and the revenue sharing measures for the national government for the financial year 2026-2027, and to dissect the micro policies and macro realities in a way that you can understand. And the true cost of the taxpayer to the taxpayer, I'm joined by a panel of economists, tax consultants and financial minds to shed light on the policy that was broken down today by the Treasury mandarins and what exactly it means as we ease into the next financial year, which will be starting on 1st July. Allow me to introduce my panelists joining me in studio. Great minds, I dare say some of the greatest minds on Kenyan television tonight. I'll start with FCPA Omingo Magara, who is the former South Mugirango Member of Parliament, but equally the party leader of People's Democratic Party. Karibu sana to the panel.
Thank you, Jesse, for having me.
Nice, great. Thanks for your time. Equally joined by Steve Biko, who is an economist and the CEO of Soko Analyst. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks for your time. Equally joined by FCPA Bernard, right? No. Okay, sorry. I think I've gotten the names wrong. Kindly give us your...
My name is CPA Wycliffe Bichanga, a council member with the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya.
Okay, karibu sana. Apologies for that small mix-up, but it's been a busy day. I'm pretty sure most of us were bright early in the morning, just trying to follow up on the proposals that were broken down by the Treasury CS. But karibu sana, Wycliffe. It's a pleasure to have you with us. We're equally joined by Ken Gishinga, who is from Mentoria Economics. He's an economist and not a new face to the panel. Karibu sana.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
Thanks for your time. Looking forward to your input. And equally joined by none other than Bilokero, who's a political economist, not a new face to the show. Thanks for your time, Bilokero.
Thank you.
Okay, gentlemen, a lot to talk about. And I'd like us to start with a breakdown of the budget highlights, because a lot was canvassed during that speech by the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury. And of course, Kenyans have genuine expectation from the government that the economy should work for them, that the cost of living is manageable, that opportunities for employment and businesses are expanding, and benefits of economic growth are shared across the society, that government listens to their concerns and responds with policies that promote opportunity, fairness and prosperity, even as the government should empower youth, women, and prudent use of public resources. So a lot of expectation, but we definitely had of the wins and the winners and the losers in the terms that are usually used during the breakdown of the budget highlights, with the National Treasury projected to get a total revenue collection of 3 trillion shillings, which is equivalent to 17.4% of the gross domestic product, while total expenditure is estimated at 4.82 trillion shillings. Some of the winners: defense sector getting an allocation of 252 billion, health sector 177 billion, the agricultural sector receiving roughly 64 billion, 143 billion shillings going to housing, urban development and public works, with 50.6 billion earmarked for the affordable housing units, even as 50 billion is going to Parliament, 30.4 billion to the judiciary, and 9.8 billion for the Auditor General, as 7 billion goes to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, while 6 billion has been set aside for the Office of the Attorney General. It goes without saying that education sector has gotten a huge chunk. They've been allocated 784 billion shillings roughly, with 424 billion going to the Teacher Service Commission, 54 billion for free secondary education, 7 billion for free primary education, and 30.7 billion shillings for junior secondary school education. A lot to talk about in the figures, and I've broken down just some of the highlights. So I'd like to begin with you, FCPA Omingo Magara, because the critical question perhaps you can start with is if this particular budget is a true reflection of the economic realities in Kenyan households. Is this a Mwananchi-friendly budget from where you sit? And kindly indicate the economic indicators you're using to get to that deduction or conclusion.
Let me say, it's good to have such nice, beautiful, astronomical figures that look attractive. And of course, we all anticipate that it's going to fly with the expectations the people of Kenya have. What perhaps sets me back is the fact that we still have to dig deep into our pockets, regardless of what the minister said, that he is not touching any tax increase. But the devil is in the details, and I'll break it down as we move, so that when we talk about an additional borrowing, both domestic and externally, if at all, it puts a burden on Kenyans at the same time. Remember, when Mbadi started his speech, he started by commending the pay-as-you-earn employees per se, who are really contributing genuinely to the pay-as-you-earn because they can be napped in the tax net. However, during the prayer breakfast, he did indicate that we know how pressure the payslip guys are, and he was going to do an expansion of that, the lower base, to lift it to 30,000. He didn't do that, and we hope he's going to do it, and he promised he's going to do it in a prayer breakfast. So what we are talking about is nice to have these nice figures, but the reality in the economy, that is, the economy is ailing. And when somebody says, for example, you must be happy because I'm exempting X commodity. Rogers, that tells you basically what that gentleman is telling you. There's no rate on that output. It means the input that came in from VAT, PS1, for example, VAT, is taken to the end consumer. Someone will tell you, yeah, it's cheaper because there's no output tax, but basically the consumer is uplifting the entire input tax in the particular product. So I think the other thing that worries all of us in terms of the situation in this country, we know the pressure is on, and we're saying, well, everybody's going to be comfortable towards the tail end. Okay. But can I tell you, surprisingly, at the end of the day, at the end of the financial year, you'll find that the supplementary expenditure, rather budgets, have even gone beyond the real numbers, for example, State House. So what we are saying here is, I hope we really mean what we are saying. Unfortunately, we do not.
Well, just to reflect on what you've said, I think CS Mbadi gave an assurance even after the budget breakdown that issue about the payee and those earning less than 30,000, they're working on it, and we should trust the government that they will walk the talk.
A quick answer to that, Rogers. It is now left to their convenience, and that's how we're going to see some numbers being pushed towards, in the middle budget, and perhaps towards electioneering period where people can appreciate them. Okay. So it becomes tokenism, not reality, in terms of equalizing our income and expenditure and making sure that we rationalize and equalize these things. And when you talk about the gainers, you started by talking about defense and lack of things. Education came last. It is the equalizer. I expected in reality that education would have gotten the best, including capitation to schools. In fact, even the unrest in schools reflects what society and community is all about.
And we'll get to the details of the allocations in just a few. But over to you, Biko, as you give us your overview of the budget. Have we done enough public participation and citizen engagement on details of the Finance Bill 2026 to avoid a recurrence of what we witnessed in 2024. Because we had the CS highlight that, he's held citizen engagement activities across the country in order to break down the details of the government's revenue collection measures.
Thank you for that. So one of the interesting things about this particular budget is that the government has taken lessons of what happened in 2024.
Okay.
And true to what the CS said is that they've been able to carry out some interesting public engagements across the country. I was able to participate in a couple of them. And the bit is, the one thing that is actually lacking is that this government is suffering what we call a trust deficit. So we've had the CS talk about what they're planning to do. They've gone around the country meeting the people and things like that. But where the interesting bit is going to be is in the supplementary budget. That's where the details are going to actually tell us exactly how the money is going to be. And if you look at the budget at 4.8 billion, and the interesting bit is trillion, is that the opposition released their shadow budget yesterday at 4.3. So if you're looking at how the country is being managed, you're asking yourself, where is this 500 billion going to be? We appreciate that the government has taken serious steps in terms of public participation, but they're not honest. And the supplementary budget is where we'll be able to know the details. And number three, if you look at the allocations being done, education, security, defense, the interesting sectors. But what about sectors that create jobs? What about manufacturing? What about agriculture, agro-processing? So for me, I'm looking at the element of, we are pumping a lot of money into education because, the entire education ecosystem has received a total of 1.7 trillion. So we have a lot of money into education, producing good graduates. But the sectors that are supposed to prepare to await for the graduates to come and work, they're not being, given the impetus they need to be able to grow. So overall, when they do public participation, it's not about the nitty-gritty of the budget. It's simply for them to be able to meet the legal threshold of what is required by the Constitution. But the details, the key details of how this money is going to help you and I is where the government is actually lacking in trust.
Interesting. Let's cross over to Wycliffe. Even as you reflect on the speech by CS Mbadi and what it means in the oncoming financial year, it goes without saying that we can't talk about budget allocations without factoring the revenue collection measures. And that's why the budget and the finance bill go hand in hand. And looking at the finance bill, we've seen a couple of proposals, taxes, levies. The gig sector has been targeted, excise tax, or is it sin tax on mobile phones. We've equally seen a potential increase in mobile money transactions, Mitumba sector, just to name a few. Some of the sectors that have been targeted in the Finance Bill 2026 in terms of revenue collection. Well, what's your review of the proposed taxation measures and the compliance burden it brings to the Kenyan households?
Thank you, Jesse, for the question. My view is that, that this finance bill is, as the minister did say, that we've not brought in new tax measures. I think what is happening is that the minister is trying to run away from the 2024 finance bill issues. So they've really tried to shield some of these items, some of the new measures that they have brought in. So they've been brought in silently. And I'm just going to mention a few. But overall, the measures are not as many as they were in 2024. And I think it is just trying to avoid that pressure. Now, what has been brought in is, which to me is the most worrying part. There is a provision in that finance bill that if KRA assesses you, when they assess you, you object, you appeal to the tax appeals tribunal, you proceed to the High Court. Overthrough as you are appealing, they require you to pay the tax. That is what the finance bill is proposing, so that whatever happens in the appeal, they shall have gotten their money. Then probably they will expect you to file in for a refund, then we all know how refunds go in this country. Now, the most worrying part is that this particular provision has been coming to the finance bills. I think, if I count correctly, this is the 4th time that we've actually seen this proposal in the finance bills. Yeah. So every time it comes, as citizens, we always complain and say, this is not right, we do not want it, it goes out. But again, year in, year out, it has been coming back. And our biggest worry is that, do they, maybe finally, we're going to see it sustained? I mean, Biko did speak about public participation, but we've seen previously that there are suggestions that you give and they're not listened to. So that is a big worry. The number 2, there is the movement of items from being zero rated to exempt. And the FCP Omingo did speak to that we've seen a movement of a number of items being moved to exempt. And indeed, that makes those items more expensive, because as FCP Omingo did say, when you exempt, you deny the service provider or the seller an opportunity to claim that VAT back. So what you will do, the VAT you incurred when you purchase it. So what happens is that the seller will then push that price to the end consumer. So we're likely to see an increase in cost in that bit.
So when you look at the efforts you're putting in to perhaps boost the e-mobility sector, and it's been changed, as you've mentioned, what exactly does it mean? Are we trying to get more revenue from the government point of view? But on the flip side, will this work in terms of breaking down the progress we've made in the e-mobility sector when we make that shift?
Absolutely. It is actually the unfortunate bit that we may end up going back to the gains that we've made over the years. And a very good example is the introduction of withholding tax on the cards. You know, the digital cards, for example, if you have a card with your bank, that card, the bank does pay a fee to Visa, for example. So on that payment, this finance bill is proposing to consider that payment as a management fees. Once it's considered as a management fees, then withholding tax is payable and probably VAT. We all know that business person, the Visa, they're not going to absorb that cost. They have to find a way to pass it to the end consumer. So our expectation is that the cost of doing e-business is going to go up. The business of using a card, you know, you go to a supermarket, you run a card, the charges are likely to go up. So what is going to happen, we are going to encourage consumers to actually revert to a cash economy. Okay. And we all know the repercussions, and we all know that because Kenya, we've been taken as a country that is advanced in usage of digital platforms. Okay. So that's why we're saying we're actually reverting back the gains that we've made.
So it could be 4 steps forward, 5 steps backwards.
1 step forward, 3 steps backward, unfortunately.
Okay. Shinga, as you come in, there's a certain proposal that I've had Kenyans talk about time and time again, that Kenya Revenue Authority is advancing data-driven reforms that may allow the taxman to actually pre-populate tax returns and generate tax assessments based on third-party data. They can take a look at your M-Pesa records, your bank data, under this proposed law. Well, what's the good and bad of that particular proposal?
That's actually a very controversial proposal. But even before Jesse, I speak about that, I think from an observation perspective of the budget, I think one of the things we have to talk about is the duration it took. This budget reading took 3 hours. If you look at the court judgment that was read a few days ago, it took 10 hours. The average concentration span of a human being is about 40 minutes. So I think at some point we need to really encourage these institutions to keep it within 1 hour, because after 1 hour you end up losing people along the way. But that's just as a side note. To that particular point on data. Obviously, data is powerful. They say data is a new oil, and if it's well used, it can actually enhance revenue collection. It can enhance in terms of understanding the economic impact. But the way it's being done right now, especially that auto population, it almost does not take into consideration your expenses. So any money that has come in, either through your M-Pesa or your bank account, is considered income and taxable at that point. So they're not looking at the expenses that you've paid, because tax should be paid on the profit or loss that had come. So that exemption of expenses actually makes your tax liability much higher. So what will happen is a lot of Kenyans will end up with huge tax demand notices from carrier wondering, how did you arrive at these? Because they don't have visibility to your expenditure. So I think it can be very, very dangerous, and it can put people on the wrong side of the law very quickly.
So how do we fine-tune it to ensure that it works in an ideal way?
Well, I think the normal way of allowing people to declare their expenses, and remember one of the controversial things that had been coming up was saying, if you don't have eatings to support your expenditure, then it's not a valid expenditure. That had been coming to and fro. Yet, think of the ordinary SME out there, how difficult it is for them to issue eatings invoices. So from their perspective is if you didn't have an expenditure supported by eatings, then that's not a legitimate. So you end up having a lot of over liability. And I think the only way to that is to, again, back to civic education, helping people, making it easier. A lot of the taxes that we have in Kenya are indirect taxes.
Okay.
And indirect taxes tend to have a lot of problems with tax administration. So we need to go back to what we talk about, a progressive tax policy, where you deal with direct taxes. See, like with income tax, the direct tax. So the administration part is very, very simple. But with indirect taxes, you end up with situations such as this, where now people have to claim refunds, and as you've been told, the refund process is very, very chaotic, very, very difficult. So I think, again, it goes back to the tax policy, which we've talked about for many years, still gathering dust. It has not been invoked into these, and even that document itself is still actually quite faulty. So I'm not surprised that it's not invoked in our planning process. But we do need to come up to say we do need progressive taxes. That's largely direct taxes, not indirect taxes. That, I think, can really save us all these tax administration expenses and energy that is actually being wasted, that could be going into productive national building.
Okay, interesting. Bilokero, as you come in, let's talk about something that's still similar in terms of the revenue collecting measures at KRA. We've had time and time again that the taxman has failed to meet its target, and we've seen some of punitive measures that might be enforced after this finance bill sails through and becomes an act. Will these provisions actually increase compliance when we're talking about expanding the tax base? Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. A lot has already been said, but let me start with the comment on the direct and indirect tax. I don't think I agree with, because this policy was made when Kibaki came in, that we move away from direct taxes to indirect, and it's because of equity. The people who are paying direct taxes are very few. People who are on income tax. Today, the minister said the total number of people in employment, about 3 million people in the country. And people who are able to, make businesses and file income taxes. So this is why we moved, when NAC came to power, to indirect, because it's more equitable. Because indirect, then it means literally all the everything in consumption has got some tax on it, and so at least there's a bit of equity in that. Anyone, the one who is in Kakamega, if she buys a glass of water, the bottle of water has got some tax. So that's the reason why there was a determined decision made to move policy towards that, and I think it makes more sense. But let me come to the question you've raised. It's always about, we want, first of all, let me start by saying, looking at the budget of Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya today, you'll find we're generally a very expensive country. And that's why our budgets are always very high. Our budget in terms of dollar today was about $38 billion. You compare that to Tanzania, it was 23 billion. Uganda was 22 billion. There was a time when, in fact, our budget was more than all the East African 5 countries combined. And you would you see that clearly, that it is our expenditure pattern, our expenditure behavior as a government, as a nation, is generally much higher than in those other countries. And the reason is very simple to discern. Look at it. We all want government to do something. So everywhere you go, Kenyans are asking for the government must do this. We want this, we want that, we want this. And these things require money. And we said, don't tax, we don't want new taxes. And don't borrow, we don't want new debt. But we want these things. So, I mean, it becomes a very difficult situation if Omingo Magara tomorrow goes to CS Treasury, and he might very soon. It will be a very difficult balancing act, Omingo, because it's you have to look at it. Our entire finance bill that we are discussing, which is so controversial, and we have to spend a lot of time and a lot of money in public participation. How much more taxes? How much additional taxes does it bring this year into the budget? It's about only 120 billion. 120 billion out of a 3.7 or whatever trillion is a small percentage. It's less than 3%. That additional revenue that is being increased through taxes. So I think those punitive measures that you mentioned are not likely to increase revenue. When there is punitive measures, people tend to become evasive on tax. And these two measures that have just been mentioned, they are punitive. You cannot tell people we're going to judge your taxes on the basis of your bank statements. Or that you have to put in, that deposit, which is in dispute. I mean, those are all things that will make people try to evade. And evasion is very easy in a country where there's corruption. Oh, it's very easy. If you want to evade, if it comes to that, then you would rather negotiate with the tax man directly and say, no. So I think government, I appreciate the efforts being made to expand the tax base. This because all the time we are saying as Kenyans, let everybody pay. Let's make it equitable. Let all Kenyans be paying taxes. If that is the case, then the push to try and expand through whatever measures that are being designed. The Mitumba guy pays some 5%, and I like the way the Mitumba people, when they were in the public position, they said, if it is 5%, we're okay. We have no problem, because then we are contributing at least also to the revenue. So I think the need to, so that everyone has a role to play in that makes sense. Then tomorrow, in terms of accountability, we can say, all of us are taxpayers, man. Yeah, we otherwise it will be only a few people who are paying taxes who can say, I'm the taxpayer. Yep.
Gishinga, you have something.
Yeah, I think it's important I correct my brother here on the issue of direct versus indirect taxes. Direct taxes are progressive, and this is actually established in economic theory because they are anchored on the wisdom of to whom much is given, much is expected. So if you have a higher salary, indeed, you should be able to pay more. Indirect taxes tend to be very regressive in nature. And what do I mean by that? Think of VAT on fuel. Whether you are a CEO of a multinational driving a Prado, or whether you have a boda, you're paying the same VAT. So if you're talking about equity, they're actually not equitable. Actually, they are regressive because everybody is paying the same despite the various stations in life. So in economics, it's actually settled that progressive taxes are actually, direct taxes are progressive in nature because they're anchored to what you have. Now, my brother raises a very good point that you've a limited number of people who earn an income.
Yeah.
So the solution then is, let's create more businesses so most people are able to be in the income bracket. So you need to, and what do you need to do that? You need to reduce the government borrowing. Right now, we are looking at the largest budget deficit in Kenya's history. We are going to be borrowing almost 1 trillion from the domestic market, crowding out the private sector. And even those few that are hanging in there, many of them will close. So if you do want to move people into a progressive tax system, you have to reduce the amount of borrowing so that banks can lend to the private sector. Those private sector companies can lend, can actually expand, create more jobs, so you have more people earning an income, then now you can have income tax for more people. Moving people to the indirect tax, first, the administration part is very difficult, but it's actually considered a very regressive approach that it actually burdens the people at the very bottom the most.
Okay.
So we have to actually correct that perspective.
Well, let's talk about this direct or indirect tax. Wycliffe, even as you come in and add your voice on that, we had Mbadi mention that 120 billion is to be collected by the finance bill. Active taxpayer base has increased by roughly 82,000 to over 6.6 million taxpayers in the Kenyan economy. Does that truly reflect an increase in terms of voluntary compliance?
Thank you for that. Let me weigh in on the matter of indirect and direct taxes. I actually want to support FCP Ekero on the fact that indirect taxes are better than direct taxes. Reason being, and they're not unfair in any way, because the rate could be the same, but the consumption is different. The example that Gishinga gave, that if you fuel, you're paying the same rate. The rate is the same, but the total amount you actually pay is different depending on your consumption. So if there's, in matters of fairness, it is actually fairer that way, because if you consume more, you spend more. Then there's a second aspect to this. When the consumption is higher, because indirect taxes are based on consumption, when consumption is higher, indirectly what we are saying is that we're producing more as a country. So the day you have information that the VAT collections has doubled, it indirectly means we've actually produced double our produce from the previous period. So it is, in my view, when we collect more from indirect taxes, we will be more progressive rather than the other way around. Secondly, on the amount that this finance bill is going to raise, I want to say that it doesn't have to be that we have to have a finance bill bringing in extra money every year. In my view, the tax rates that exist should be able to be sustained. However, the government should be able to bring in policies that expand the economy in such a way that we're able to generate more revenue from the existing laws. What I mean is that if businesses are paying corporation tax at the rate of 30%, that can remain forever. But we should be able to ensure that we have more businesses making bigger profits from one period to another. To me, that then makes sense, because the way our expenditure is growing, we will expect to see our revenue grow, because the business, the space has been expanded, the economy has expanded, and as a country, we're producing more. Our focus should be able to be on production. That as a country, are we in a position to actually produce more? Are we able to make more money? Are we creating jobs? Are we creating, are we exporting more, for example? Are we able to feed ourselves? To me, that should be our focus as a country.
Interesting. Biko.
I would like to address a couple of issues. One of the reasons why our budget is very expensive is we are a corrupt country. A third of the budget is actually going to be stolen. That is something we've spoken about. And the cost of doing business in this country has become very expensive. That is number one. Number two, for me, I believe this budget wasn't about the ordinary Kenyan. The government is looking at gross domestic product, PMI index, inflation rate, growth rate, interest rate. But the ordinary Kenyan is looking at, am I able to afford a meal? Am I able to pay school fees for my kids? Am I able to go to work? You know, I have an emergency. Am I able to cater for this? So the metrics that the government is using and what ordinary people are using are very different. And I believe that the deficit is so huge that the government is going to force out the private sector from the local market. And already we are heading into a very toxic political environment. So a lot of the entrepreneurial ecosystem is actually shutting down. People are waiting. And in as much as the government hasn't added in new measures in terms of taxes, the element of compliance is going to be very difficult. Because now Kenya is very corrupt, and as the former senator put it, when you want to hide something in Kenya, it's very easy. So I think that for this budget to actually make sense, is that the implementing authority, KRA, needs to take a step back and do civic education. Sit down with the informal sector that you want to actually broaden the tax base and educate them on why compliance is very important. Right now, KRA is calling every person. They're tabulating they're doing assessment based on your private data and sending your demand. So what is going to happen as we head into a toxic political environment is that Kenyans are going to get off plan and stop using payment plans and go hard cash. Because now, if I use M-Pesa, my details will be out there. If I do cash, so ultimately, this budget is going to contract the economy. World Bank has given it around 4.3, 4.7. I'm giving it around 3.8, 3.5. And the fact that unemployment is picking up, many businesses are shutting down, it all goes back to the one element that no one is addressing, the corruption that we need to address. And how is KRA going to comply, ensure that every person who needs to pay taxes is compliant. And lastly, the element of direct and indirect taxes. For me personally, as a Kenyan, I believe every single Kenyan must pay taxes. Whether you're a boda boda or a mama mboga, pay your taxes. So I think I'm for direct taxes. Pay your taxes so that you'll be able to make a better political decision. When your pocket is hit, when your bank account is hit, then you will say, let me go and vote for someone who's given me a better policy forum. Policy formulation for how the next 2 years are going to be. And lastly, and I've said this, all over the place, that the idea of having financial bills every single year creates a very unpredictable business environment. So every single year, people are waiting to see if I have a factory or I run a farm, I'm worried every single year new tax measures are being brought in. Why can't we change tact and say, for the next 5 years, these are the tax measures we're going to do. Create continuity, stability, and create an environment whereby the business community is able to sit down with the taxman and agree on how refunds are going to be done, for example, and agree on how implementation of, if I owe KRA some money, how am I going to be able to pay for this? Because right now there's something that I was hoping former senior politicians, they will address the element of securitization of our taxes. Yeah. This government is actually using our future taxes as collateral for debts today. So if the next government comes in place, where are they going to get the money from? And this is something that the current finance bill did not address. And I think it is a conversation that we need to have. The ripple effect at the end of the day.
Okay. Just let me weigh in on this. What my brother and Mheshimiwa Senator talked about. That if I would find myself in Treasury, I could. But it is so basic, common sense, that we have our priorities upside down. Jesse, you've been elected by your own people. And I see it in most governors, and of course our top class politicians, where of course I've not had that position before. You've been elected today, we are too lavish that the people who give you a vote, they all become like a threat. You must have 10 sirens running ahead of you. It's extremely primitive. We talk about austerity measures, but only for us to please others. But all together, we are sucked by the same kind of primitive thing. In terms of compliance, in tax on the sufficiency curve called Laffer curve, if you can even achieve more by reducing taxes, then people will have no reason to run away from it. The lower curve, the lower the taxes, the more the revenue come in. At a particular point, when you get to a point here, it starts tipping down. I think Kenya is beyond the optimum lava curve. It will surely come down. You are telling me, Jesse, I'll give my personal example. We could be finding a client of yours importing, say, 10 containers, right? Last year they were doing 10. In Kenya, have no way to get their targets. They assume project their income from my previous year. This year, of course, with austerity measures, people are not even consuming because the pay slips were slashed. The middle class are not consuming. What I was importing, 10 containers, I'm importing now 2. The customs was supposed to collect revenue from there. They can't achieve their targets. So what we need to do also is to be more reasonable enough. Let us penalize theft. And I've said this a couple of times, but it appears like it's like, kupigia mbuzi guitar. It cannot turn to music. We have a serious problem in terms of graft, and people are also saying, surely, why must I pay so much if I can't get nothing? We are driving through potholes. When I hear some of us talking about flying to Canaan through Singapore, when we can't even feed our people. For example, Jesse, I'm a dairy farmer. You're telling me Kenya is producing 5.4 billion liters of milk, the demand is 8 billion. When I heard the minister, they say that they actually they are given a latitude to buy some dairy meal or inputs from dairy. In that particular same balance sheet, rather the budget, they exempted those inputs, where they had the categorization of the affordable housing, and then also they exempted the inputs products for the dairy cow. What does that mean? The inputs are going to go higher. In Kenya, the market is so skewed. Even when you produce a farm raw materials, the manufacturer dictates the price. You are motivated to work, you can even close shop. Even when Mbadi says there's increased productivity and we're going to food secure, we are all food secure. We only just dressing this thing up. The rest of the matter is the economy is ailing, and the efficiency, I can promise you, it will dip this coming year.
But even as you talk about wastage, graft, and theft, has there been any progress in improving efficiency and value for money in public expenditure? We heard from the CES efforts to enhance transparency through talk of e-government procurement, fiscal oversight, zero-based budgeting, improving cash management, reducing overdraft financing, and how government accounts for financial resources. So is there any progress that has been?
Okay, it comes in by example. We have had even that efficiency in e-transactions, including e-citizen. You saw what happened. I can tell you also, as much as you want to do it, the same guys who are not honest are punching also the same procurement issues, and they create something that makes something for them. We said NHIF was a scam. I think she is worse of a scam than what we had. So we polish and package nice things, but they're not even intended for you as a Kenyan. It is what am I getting in out there as a policymaker and a big man in position. It is a high time that we also as Kenyans put to question our leadership. Surely, you came in yesterday and you can afford to buy 3 houses in XYZ, of course, they will not give me details. The discipline must start with the same minister. I want to see a minister like who was trying to bring in the issue of Passat. Why would you have 10 vehicles going to Nyaligunga in Kisumu and you are security free? Okay. Those are your brothers and sisters. It must start by practicing and give Kenyans hope that as leaders, you know, the school is as good as the headmaster and vice versa. If the headmaster is a crook, for sure, the students, you expect much, so not much from it.
They should lead by example.
Example, yeah.
Okay, let's cross over to Bilokero, because at the end of the day, we have to ask which sectors have the highest impact in improving the lives of Kenyans and whether these sectors got the allocations they truly deserve. Yep. Do we have our priorities right, first of all? Because if you look at security, are Kenyans more secure with a higher allocation? If you look at education, is the education sector, i.e. basic education, higher learning, actually at a better place with the 770 billion shillings, with all the challenges we've seen from late capitation and disbursement of funds? Learning materials are sometimes still an issue. And mind you, we still have teachers who are waiting for promotion, the JSS teachers who are on the periphery. The challenges are there, but have we allocated as per the challenges in these priority sectors?
You know, Rogers, if you ask this was this, what economy is about, it's about allocation of scarce resources to satisfy needs that everyone has. It's impossible for any government to satisfy needs of everyone. That's the basic fundamental, really, that we should all appreciate. So what you look at is, in relative terms, really, looking at, you know, we always compare this with the last one. Are we better off? Has it improved? Or, like you asked earlier, for value, are we getting value for money? But in terms of when I listen to the CS today, I think given the circumstances we are in, I think when I look at the performance that he explained in detail in agriculture, in health, in water, in housing, SMEs, and all those things, when you put everything together, you would say, given the challenges that we have today as a country, in terms of the debt burden that we have and the resources, the revenue situation that we have, I think any government would struggle to do more than that. It's not going to be easy. But to answer your question, is there priority? No. There's no government. Governments always do silly things all over. It's the same everywhere you go. Look, how do you justify you are giving the security sector 567 billion? It's more than health, water, roads, transport, all those, particularly agriculture, health, water, and roads combined. You're given security is more, 567 billion. I mean, look, anyone will tell you, we are not really at war with anyone. We are not really that, I know this young man, Steve Biko and his team will be on the streets, but I don't think we need to spend 567 billion.
and Jesse, comparing that, we even more private security guards in all our gates.
So I think, yes, in terms of priorities, government always has that challenge. When you go into the estimates, you'll actually find, that's when you'll see that there's always misplaced priorities and there are inefficiencies, there are duplications. I'll give you a simple one. What national government does versus what has been, devolved to counties. We've discussed this for a long time. If you take health, 90% of the services of health, the functions of health, has been devolved. So when you give 242 billion to Afya House here, it's 50% of what you have given, in fact, more than 50% of what you have given to 47 counties. And they have only 10% referral and policy. So there are challenges. The same thing, agriculture, you have devolved substantially. But so when you go on the ground is when you see duplication. Yeah, you'll find the Ministry of Water is drilling boreholes and putting ponds, and the county guy is doing it, and another part, the authorities, those authorities in the regions are doing it. So there's a lot of wastage, there's a lot of duplication, and there is misplaced priority. This has been the culture in our country, and I think it goes back to society. It goes back to why, as a society, we have corruption is pervasive, and everyone, if you give Magara a job tomorrow, he wants to have the resources. If he doesn't get the resources, he will feel this office is not, so he'll go and fight. So although they talk of program-based budgeting, but at the end of the day, our budgets are always whatever was there plus. Nobody wants to go and start from absolute zero. And they need the tea, they need the coffee, and they need to. So we've looked at this thing. We were with him in the good old days when Parliament was Parliament, and Kenyans knew it. We tried to go through the presentations or the estimates with a pencil, and but you'll still find the same challenges today. That governments, there are a lot of things that if somebody really wants to cut down, they can. But that culture of living large, that culture of people wastage in government is a culture that requires a bit of effort from everyone to change.
You've mentioned about the allocation to counties. Gishinga, do we take devolution seriously? According to CS Mbadi, we have consistent and timely disbursement to counties. Equitable shareable revenue to counties is increasing from 370 billion in 2022-2023 to 428 billion where we are in the next financial year. But some of the realities are there. We saw a mediation committee set up in Parliament as we were debating which amount will be disbursed to counties, and they finally settled on that 428 billion, but Senate was pushing for 450 billion. At the end of the day, the source has so much, yet counties definitely need these funds in a bid to bring services closer to the people. Talk to us about our devolved units. Is the commitment to safeguarding devolution clear under this administration if you borrow from the budgets under the Kenya Kwanza administration?
The commitment is not clear. First of all, let me say devolution is probably the best thing that the 2010 Constitution introduced in Kenya. because it was meant to take services to the ordinary people. The first thing this administration did, you remember even the Ministry of Devolution, that was very strong, was actually removed and merged with other areas. Some of the devolved functions like agriculture, just when you talk about creating jobs, you want to invest in labor-intensive sectors. And agriculture, tourism, these are labor-intensive sectors that even with a bit of investments, they can create a lot of jobs. Agriculture has been devolved. If you look at housing, it's a devolved function, but the national government has taken over with the affordable housing program and done it in its own way. So devolution has not been respected. It's not been allowed to unfold the way it is, and it's not being allowed to create the jobs, because when the Gen Zs marched in 2024, they were saying they want jobs. So at the very beginning of today's budget, we should have been hearing, is this budget going to enable more jobs to be created? So you want to have investments in these sectors that can absorb a lot of people. Our obsession with like the National Infrastructure Fund, some of those are very capital-intensive sectors. They might not create the amount of jobs that are needed. But look at things like tourism, just a bit of investment. You go to Morocco. Morocco gets 19 million tourists in a year. Kenya gets 2.5 million, and Kenya has far much more to offer than Morocco. So it shows that we are not really thinking out of the box in terms of where are we going to put our money to create jobs, our tax policies. Again, I like what Honorable Magara talked about, the Laffer curve. That was a very important point that I think many Kenyans don't appreciate in terms of our taxation. The Laffer curve is an economic concept that says, if you think that raising taxes will generate revenue forever, unfortunately that's not true. When you raise taxes, especially indirect taxes, that is where I wanted to correct my brother Wycliffe. When you raise indirect taxes, you actually change consumption patterns. So if your VAT on fuel is 8%, if you raise it to 16%, it's not true that the government will collect double the revenue of taxes. Actually, what will happen, people will change their consumption patterns. So if somebody was driving 5 days a week, they'll actually end up driving 2 days a week. So the government loses out on revenue. The citizen loses out on the opportunities of going to those meetings. And actually, it's a lose-lose effect. And that's why we talk about really being against these indirect taxes, because they change the demand, the consumption structure. So poor economic policies is what is driving Kenya into poverty. Kenya is a very wealthy country, but poor economic policies is what is driving Kenya into poverty. And if we don't watch out, we might actually lose the leadership of the East Africa region.
Wycliffe, majority of Kenyans are employed in the informal sector. We've heard of the figures from our panelists, including the CS, who broke down that, I think private sector employs 75% of the 3 million Kenyans in the formal sector. Though when we talk about the informal sector, tax, social security, healthcare deductions might not be a reality for them. Are there budget initiatives factored in the budget to enhance the role of private and the manufacturing sector, just to name a few, in a bid to make them employ more Kenyans? What facilitates the manufacturing sector in the budget to enhance the ease of doing business in the country, from your analysis?
That's actually the question that has been with us for a very long time. Just to start from the informal sector, I think we're roughly about 83% of these economies in the informal sector. And the frustration has always been that maybe we're not collecting enough from that sector. What we've seen before, there have been measures trying to force the informal sector to formalize through taxation. You remember in the finance bill of 2023, there was the introduction of e-teams, which was supposed to be effective 1st January 2024, which we are now currently struggling with in terms of getting it implemented well. And the idea was that by use of that, you will then now force that informal sector to come into the tax bracket. Have we succeeded? We're still on the way. But was that the best way? In my view, government has many other ways of trying to formalize the informal sector. Let's think about incentivizing, for example, that sector. Let's try and include them in the financial market. How are we able to give them loans, for example, and by so doing we will look attractive, get them formalized, and then include them now in the tax bracket. In terms of the collections from that sector, and also looking at how many of us actually pay taxes, my view is that, and again agreeing with the two gentlemen in the show, that maybe when we think of reducing our tax rates, we are actually going to have more people into the bracket. And also, we could also be very creative and say, the informal tax sector, you've not paid the taxes before, we want to attract you. Can we be creative and say, maybe the first years when you join the formal sector, your rates are going to be lower than others? Maybe we can say a company between 0 and 2 years, between 2 years and 5 years, have differential rates to just attract, and once you have them, then you have them. By so doing, you shall have grown the economy. That has been my thinking.
Okay. Well, because you come in, even as you add on what has been said, I have to ask about the cost of fuel that has a compounding effect on the cost of living. Our reporters across the country were getting samples from Kenyans, and most were pointing towards mafuta hii inaumiza biashara. And we've seen a lot of developments in the energy sector, a Middle East conflict that has caused hike in fuel prices. We saw energy sector officials actually arrested due to importing substandard fuel, which still entered the market. We've seen VAT reduction, I think it's for 3 months, in order to alleviate the cost, 11 billion set aside to stabilize the prices of fuel in the country. Sharp increments, light reductions here and there in the cost of fuel. If you summarize everything we've seen, have we properly managed the energy sector in the backdrop of the Middle East conflict that is affecting pricing and supply?
I remember saying that the biggest cost this government faces is the element of trust. If you look at the energy sector, for example, our fuel doesn't come from Iran. We apparently have a government-to-government deal between Kenyan government and Saudi Arabia's government. So I've been asking myself, how? The number two, I remember the CS for energy before Parliament. He said that even him is shocked that the key gentlemen in the energy sector, EPRA, Kenya Pipeline, were told to resign. He wasn't aware. You get the One Petroleum, the company that actually brought in the petrol, say that they got clean directions from the government to bring in the investment, to bring in the fuel. So for me, I think there's been a lot of lying around so that certain people can be able to benefit. The Kenyan economy runs on diesel. The majority of the people outside key towns, Mombasa, Nairobi, Nakuru, Kisumu, use paraffin to cook. So when you put diesel at 200 shillings plus per liter, you're basically saying that 50% of companies are going to shut down. Either they will reduce completely. If they're doing 3 shifts in a day, they will do 2 or 1 to just be able to meet up the cost. And then the worst bit that happened is the moment fuel went up, Kenya Power increased its EPRA increased the rates for electricity, making it worse. So for me, I think it's a deliberate effort by this government to kill the Kenyan economy, because we run on diesel. Diesel has become very expensive. Even the 3 months reduction on VAT is not going to help. The preferences and choices of the Kenyan people is now, if I was driving 4 or 5 times a week, I'm going to drive now on Sundays alone to go to church with my family. These are the days I will just use a Matatu. And then you realize that if I had a car, I would pass by a restaurant and buy some food. So the ripple effect across the economy is everyone is going to pay the price. A restaurant that was busy every evening now has 2-3 people. You know, factories that are doing 3-4 shifts in a day, they're doing 1. And the biggest problem that we have in the country is the element of accountability. We have no problem paying taxes. I have no problem paying 90% of my money going to taxes if I will see the impact of these taxes. We are spending trillions in road infrastructure, but every single day I'm hitting potholes. Yeah, we spend trillions on road, but the people who are doing the roads take the money back to their country. So I believe we have a government that is very clear on ensuring that the Kenyan people are poor deliberately. And just to talk about what's going to happen, access to credit is going to be very expensive because 1.1 trillion local borrowing will send away the private sector. You know, banks will look at who's easier to give the money to government. Because if I give to Biko today, tomorrow might not be able to pay me. So, and it's going to be a very big problem. Yeah. Now, the other element is that Kenya has become a net importer. Our food imports have doubled in the last 1 year. Okay? We've become a trading center. We no longer produce. We no longer manufacture anything. And that is a very, very big problem. And I've been saying that if we want to solve the Kenyan problems, we need to look at production, agro-processing, and manufacturing. All right. Our housing, we've given housing 145 billion. We don't have a housing problem. We have an income problem. I don't want the government to build me a home, create an environment for me to get a job so I can be able to buy the kind of house I want. So this 145 billion should go to a key sector like manufacturing. You know, if I was the CS for this country, I'll put that 145 billion into the private sector banking and tell them this is collateral for you to lend to the SMEs. If they fail to pay, you use that money.
But you know what they say, over 800,000 jobs have been created in that ecosystem.
Let me tell you something.
Yeah,
I mean,
yes.
We have the most educated young people on the continent. Go to any Mjengo site, people holding degrees. Go to any border site, people having I asked guys to apply for a driver position. All of them have 2 degrees. So what jobs are we talking about? We are a gig economy. We are influencers and content creators and people who dance on social media. We need to create jobs. Okay. And creating jobs means focusing on manufacturing. Let me tell you something. Manufacturing, agriculture, production have been given a combined total of 22.3 billion. Why have we doubled the budget to security? What? I'm going to protest. Seriously. Yeah? Why are we giving village elders 4 billion? What economic sense does this make? This government knows what they're doing. This government is a thieving government. Full stop.
Jesse, I want to start from my brothers left it.
Yeah.
Our priorities, upside down.
Yes.
Duplication, tremendous. A simple example. The CDF MP has a bursary kitty. The women rep has a bursary kitty. The governor has a bursary kitty. The minister has got a bursary kitty. Now, in the end, we have kids, and they've seen, sometimes you media have done a wonderful job by highlighting a few, but how many reach you for that kind of, visibility? It is basic. In a budget which presented yesterday as a central government, basically, tighten your belt, cut on a few things, have even capitation first of all. Education is the equalizer, for heaven's sake. And today, instead of, India developed from cottage industries. Do you know it doesn't cost even 20 million shillings to have, avocado pulping plant that can extract avocado oil for our women to use the beauty product. It doesn't take 20 million shillings. But we are here excited and parading our Kenyan young people at KICC to apply for jobs of driving in Middle East where they're defiled. You know what that means? We fought for independence. We are enslaving ourselves now to the first other countries, and we're making their countries a reference point, which means if we were supposed to promote Singapore, we'll get more tourists because Kenyan leadership is talking about Singapore. Having said that, let's get back to the issue of that job you're talking about, job creation. I haven't had one serious Kenyan saying, I got a job here, 600,000 they're talking about who got jobs. Jesse, in definition of unemployment, it is that component where you work for reward when you have the energy, and the social security component are determined. Now, when we build these houses from graduates who have gone to school, they use the energy to carry those bricks up there. When the muscles get feeble, what do? Then you start a cycle of giving them 40 billion shillings to reach them. Employment is structured in a way. Okay. And I think that's how we need to work out of this. If we could stop duplication in the Westage, in fact, Kenya can run on a budget of less than 2 trillion shillings. And it's possible, it's doable. True. The problem is, more than half, in fact, I thought it's a joke, more than half of the money is wasted. What do you mean, JC? When I was in Netherlands, the Prime Minister of Netherlands, where we borrow, begging bowls, primitively so, and we're shameless, we go and borrow from them. The Prime Minister of Netherlands I saw them after lunch walking on foot to the office with a secretary or PA beside them. 2. Today, our president is going to greet his, mother, whatever. It's 400 vehicles that will follow him. Does it make any economic sense? We must be realistic and get back to our senses. And I think we need from radical surgery and a complete transformation of our leadership in this country.
Interesting. Budget is financed from 3 sources: ordinary revenue, talk about VAT, import excise duty, income tax. Then we have the non-tax revenue, appropriations in aid, levies charged for services given by government, and this contribute to roughly 3.6 trillion shillings thereabout. The last portion, grants and donations, are rather minimal. I've heard that income tax is declining in terms of collections, but interestingly, appropriations in aid, when you talk about business permits, talk about NTSA services, passport, ID rates, this seems to be the fastest rising contributor in terms of collections. In form of levies, do these levies lead to a rise in cost of doing business in the country from your analysis?
Yes, I have no doubt that the government in the last decade or so has been trying to be, let me use the word, for lack of a better word, crafty. If you use the word tax, Kenyans would not accept. So you introduce other ways of raising revenue. You call them charges, you call them levies, you call them this, so that all this appropriation is that today it's really a major, and you have to be in business to know this. Stop watching a passport or ID, these are nothing. But if you are in business and you know how many licenses you have to apply for, you know how many things you have to pay for. You want to put a small one like this, you have to go to NEMA, you pay so much. You go to construction authority, you pay so much. You go to this. I mean, it's crazy. So this is why appropriations in aid is, because literally every government agency or ministry or department has been asked to raise revenue from where you are, so that then KEBS will charge a percentage on your total turnover. This one will charge this. So this is a burden, definitely, and it goes on to the cost of. But the government is finding a way in which it can raise revenue without calling it tax. And so really, when you're paying taxes and you're also paying for the services that you're supposed to be provided, then of course it's not a good thing. So this will go on. Because it has become a major source of, and we've allowed it. I mean, look, Parliament, there's nothing that has not got approved in Parliament or in a county assembly. That's why on fuel, you have all those 7 or 8 or 9 different levies, on fuel, and this is all approved. All of them have a piece of legislation that supports it. But So I think that one, to answer your question, yes, it is. The income is reducing because, that's why Chinga, I want to tell you, don't bet a lot on incomes to get your taxes or directors, because our total people who actually earn income properly are the 3 million before paying tax. And what are the 3 million? More than half of them, actually, more than half, much more than half of them is civil servants. So you're just moving money from this hand to this hand. You're recruiting more civil servants, they pay you more taxes. This government recruited 100,000 teachers. And so TSA will pay more taxes, basically, but you're paying more money again for public wage and so forth. So, but the thing is, if we want to change this economy, it's about changing the policy environment for business so that you can encourage businesses. Kenyans are not all businesses, let me be frank with you. You know, it's easy for us to sit here and say, and we've had the same conversation for the last 20 years. From the time I went to Parliament, Magara, you remember, I used to run this program called Showdown on NTV in 2003. This has been the same, it's the same, nothing has changed. So if we change the policy environment, to make things, for example, reduce the tax, still it will not mean we'll attract business, because what will happen is energy is still going to be very expensive. You know, security will become, for some people, an issue. Every investor has his own things he looks at. But I think the end of the day is why, the reason why, you know, even when you're looking at two nations, you might find that certain people, even in Kenya, for example, you might find where Gichinga comes from, with respect to his community. They're more enterprising, for example, than where Biko comes from. I know where he comes from.
Okay.
So even in terms of business, because it's the business which generates employment, government can only provide environment. Even if they're putting up those industrial parks in the counties and all those things they're talking about, the minister talked about, you can do all those things, but you need some businessman to go and put up his industry to make that avocado juice. The government is not going to make avocado juice. But then if you are not in business, we are not going to do it. And we're not creating jobs. But so I think the policy environment needs to be looked at by the government so that we can get investors. And even the current people who are in the industry here, they want to expand their business. Okay. But when their bottom line is shrinking, because of the cost of doing business, because of the, our competitiveness has gone down. Yeah. Our competitiveness in the region is really going down because our cost of production is very high. Look at the maize. We are buying cheaper maize from everywhere else in Africa around us. Why? We have the land. But the thing is, our cost of production is always high. And the reasons are known. Some things are constant. Rogers, everybody who comes to this house knows corruption is a constant factor. And it contributes to part of this cost. Whatever you do.
Major.
It's a major cost.
Okay. So, Gichinga, we have to talk about debt, because a chunk of the money we'll be collecting will go to finance debt, whether paying interest or going into a debt obligations, hence perhaps the need for the government to diversify our sources of income. I've heard that debt is a tool for development, but only when managed sustainably. So are we managing our debt sustainably? When you look at our budget of 4.8 trillion vis-a-vis public debt stock of up to 12 trillion Kenya shillings, it's definitely a tough balancing act. But let's talk about PPPs. Let's talk about securitization, pending bills. Should they be considered in our total debt stock?
Absolutely. Pending bills, this is money owed to contractors. So it's as legitimate as money that's owed to bondholders. So it has to be there. And that was actually the messaging the leadership got at the IMF spring meetings in April. They were told, you are not declaring your full debt. And that's something we've said for a long time. Too many contractors are having a very hard time because they've not been paid for the past 1, 2, 3 years, both at the national level, at the debt level. So debt is a big problem. In fact, I'd say it's the biggest problem Kenya is facing. If you look at the tail end of Kibaki's administration, the percentage that was going to the consolidated fund service from revenue, this is money going for debt service, pension, it's about 13%. Now it's about 40%. It's almost tripled. And that's why there's no money for public services. There's no money for healthcare. There's no money for the things that we need. So what is the secret to it? We have to reduce our deficits. The only way to reduce our public debt is to start winning off our deficit. So when I saw we're running a deficit of 1.2 trillion, I was like, where is the commitment? Yet you remember during the campaign season, the phrase that kept being repeated all the time is, if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Yet we've dug deeper and deeper. So it has to be a time that this administration, and even the opposition, the united opposition that wants to provide leadership, they have to all be committed to not only saying that we're going to reduce our debt, but now start giving credible ways of how to get this country out of debt. Because the risk we run is now, even things like, for example, the fuel crisis we had, the reason the CS had such a hard time reducing the VAT is because part of those things have been securitized and they have been committed. And it goes back to the tools that my brother was talking about, the levies. Levies are actually instruments that are meant to incentivize behavior. Jesse, I'll tell you, the first principle of economics is people respond to incentives. So things such as levies are supposed to be able to moderate the environment, but we've turned them into revenue-generating mechanisms. And you've given a good example of passports. When you have huge revenues coming from passports, yes, the government will start patting itself on the shoulders and say, oh, yes, you've hit your revenue objective. But a good economist should ask, why is that? And if you go to Nyayo House, I can confirm to you that it's because of many young people who are trying to get passports to leave this country because they can't get jobs in this country. So it's not a good story. Yes, you'll hit your revenue targets, but those things were never meant to be revenue targets. They were meant to be signals to tell you there's an alarm. You go to Nyayo House today, all the Gen Zs are in Nyayo House today looking for passports, and these are people who want to work in Kenya. But now they're going to work as drivers in Qatar. Okay. So it's not a good story. So we can't start securitizing these things just for revenue, yet these are policy instruments that are supposed to be giving us feedback on what's happening on the ground.
Wycliffe, as you come in and perhaps add on what has been said when it comes to matters to do with our public debt management, pending bills is a core issue. We heard from the CS, the Pending Bills Verification Committee formed in 2023 assessed 91,000 pending bill claims during the verification process that were valued at over 637 billion. After the exercise, 29,000 claims amounting to 235 billion were recommended for settlement. And of this amount, 80 billion has been settled through the securitization of the road sector. So we have 155 billion balance thereabout. Talk to us about the settlement strategy. We've seen a deliberate policy of settling claims. I think it was less than 100 million. And we had the justification is that it has a high multiplier effect since that accounts for majority of the suppliers. Are we intentional about sorting this issue? Because according to the CS, in the next 2 years, they'll be intentional about allocations, direct budgetary allocations, and securitization in order to clear that balance in 2 years.
You know, Jesse, the biggest tragedy is that we have suppliers who've done service to the government, but they have not been paid. The moment you fail to pay your suppliers, you stifle the economy, because what has happened is that cash flow has then been affected. Most of these contractors, and I think we all remember the sad incident in Kisumu, where a contractor had to take his life because of delayed payments, and yet the taxman was pushing him. But those are the stories that we hear in boardrooms across the country. We have people who've been frustrated for lack of collection, for lack of payment by the government. So we were happy in 2023 when the government created the committee. I must say that they must have taken a little bit longer than we could have expected. But it is good to hear that now it is finalized and payment is happening. Although it could have been good to have the report publicly published so that we know what happened, what is the fate of the rest who are now no longer in that list. It is possible that we have genuine businessmen who've been locked out of that list, but at least it will be good to know what is their fate so that we know. But in terms of payment and is this a proper method of paying, I will say that we hope that the money that the CS did commit, it actually gets to the pockets of their suppliers. It will boost the economy big time, and especially a year like this, it will be good to then have cash flow added into the economy. To the rest, we can only hope that it actually works that way. Right. But for me, it will be good to have the full report so that we know what happened to, because from those numbers, you realize that more than a half of those amounts are actually not confirmed. That is a big worry.
Okay, Steve Biko, as you add on what has been said, we've seen a recurrence of audit queries exposing, public resources and to fiscal risks and weakening service delivery. So, according to the government, they intend to introduce amendments to the PFMA to strengthen mandate of the Auditor General to enhance oversight across the public sector, so that they can track implementation of audit resolutions with clear accountability mechanisms. That's the lingo we were given by the Cabinet Secretary. According to you, will this perhaps strengthen capacity, prudent use of resources, despite previous reports gathering dust with very minimal implementation?
Let me give you an example. January 2026 to now, state houses spend money. I think the total bill is coming to around 21 billion since this government took over. This year alone, they've borrowed over 4.5 billion without going through the official channels. As I said earlier, this government is made of charlatans. They're very good in speaking. Ruto can actually make you buy your own mother. They're very sweet with words. The element of the Public Finance Management Act is very clear. It doesn't need any amendments to it. If we can just implement the act alone, we can do a lot in this country. The aspect about audit, ensuring that government are spending very well. When the Gen Z led the revolt in 2024, the president agreed that he will reduce his advisors. He agreed that they will reduce the number of motorcade. He had an array of resolutions in terms of austerity measures. Yeah. But unfortunately, he's gone back to doing more and more. So for me, I think the element of audit queries, in fact, the Auditor General has been asking for more budgets so that she can be able to do her work better. The amount of money allocated now, I think 9 billion, is not sufficient enough. So that amount, she was asking for almost 20 billion. You're giving her 9 billion. How are you going to say you're giving her 9 billion, which is half of what she needs to be able to do better audit queries? Remember, we have the national government, we've got county government units, we've got government agencies. So I think Mbadi was simply trying to appease the foreign masters we've been able to borrow money to. Just two things before I hand over the mic. We've spoken about securitization of particular taxes. There was no public participation on this element. This government is simply doing things because they've been able to compromise Parliament. Securitization is a very key component in terms of our debt aspect. And when you have the government borrowing money without going through the proper channels, how much debt can we say Kenya legally owes? How much do we really owe foreign development partners, and how much do we owe local partners? Okay. We don't. And securitization has become a catchy phrase, making the government sound smart in terms of financial management, but it's actually very wrong. And this is why I keep saying that the problem is Parliament, because this is something Parliament should have actually been able to address. And number two, if Mbadi is very serious in terms of saying that they're going to do the right things, they should have done public participation, because now they're unable to sort out the fuel price because the taxes have been securitized. So what happens next? What happens when a different government comes in place? How are Kenyans going to get services when, you see, the other thing is health is devolved, but we're giving the national agency a lot more money than what's being given to counties in terms of health. So for example now, and we're having referral hospitals, their money going through a single unit first. And then that money is not being securitized. So how are people going to get medication? Lastly, Parliament yesterday gave up on following up on 6.3 billion that was looted from the e-citizen. So when Parliament, which is supposed to audit such queries, says no, enough is enough, we're no longer looking at austerity measures to be able to run very well. We're just simply looking at a government that is using the budget lines to be able to loot more.
Jesse, thank you for this. I've been waiting to say something before I forget. Jesse, let me say this. When we deliberately did a program-based budget, there was a deliberate move towards it. Because initially what used to happen in the previous constitution, you will find a minister coming and kind of displaying a box out there. You don't know whether it's carrying maggots or stones or whatever it is. We said, can we open it up front to understand how we package it ourselves, that what you are doing for me, don't do a heliport for me when I've got no helicopter. That was the deliberate thing. Bring it closer home, link it with the pending bills. Out of that program-based budget, we are allocating monies for rolling out projects which have been funded already by the program-based budget. Let me tell you the criminality and the theft in here. The first mischief starts in when you commit to, a project to be delivered to you, either with the money attached to it, and that money does not get there. Somebody has pilfered it out there, so that becomes a pending bill. When in actual fact that money was funded. Now, because of stolen from what was legitimately for somebody, criminally again, now we are borrowing upfront to pay these guys. You can see the mess in here. Cleaning this mess, Jesse, will require some serious, what do you call it, defined intervention. Because remember, we had a budget for this. If somebody has picked it out, we are going to borrow for the future, for our children, commit them to pay what somebody has eaten in here. In the program budget, there's nothing supposed to be operationalized if there's no budget. How then did it become a pending bill, particularly after the constitution theft? Number two, in the budget we raised, our alternative budget we raised yesterday, we're saying Kenyans don't even know what they owe and what was used for. What is it so difficult that you're going to take a loan from a cooperative and pay your son's school fees? Can't you tell your family that this is what I've done? Why is it supposed to be a secret thing? It is because, as one of the loopholes, I borrow from out there knowing what I want to do, and a part of the money is left offshore. We are actually paying for air. And when you find somebody borrowing to consume, that's a very, very bad parent. You don't borrow to buy bread. You borrow to invest and create wealth and pay back that loan. Unfortunately, that's what we are. The problem we have, lack of fiscal discipline, and tightening our belt. Conveniently, those ones who have no muscle, but us, we can fly with jets and have massage, on board. Unfortunate for us. But I can tell you, there's hope for Kenyans. Nothing is lost.
Okay.
But we need to get back Kenya on the rails.
All right.
Otherwise, I doubt whether we have any planning to do after this, unless this kind of theft that's outright stops.
We're pressed of time. I'm actually being told time is up. Unfortunately, that's all we had, gentlemen. There's so much more to converse, but unfortunately, time is of the essence, and that's how we finalize today's conversation. Asanteni sana for your input. I think we've been able to break down this particular budget and the key concerns that are being raised. Well, apart from the National Infrastructure Fund, we're unable to talk about that. Oh, is it? Okay. Interesting. Gentlemen, asanteni sana. Omingo Magara, equally joined by Biko, Wycliffe, Gishinga, and Bilokero. We appreciate your input right here on the show. I hope we've been able to break it down in a way that our viewers have been able to understand the contentious issues, the gains, the losses, and some of the areas we need to prioritize. My name is Jesse Rogers. Thank you so much for watching. Have yourself a lovely evening.